We're in James chapter 3, but before we do that, I want to do a little bit more explanation on James chapter 2, faith and works, and the differences between Paul and James on those verses. This is my take on this. It's my opinion. Take it for what it is. But I really think that what this comes down to is a difference in audience. That James is talking into a different situation than what Paul is talking into. Paul, we know, is talking into a situation where Jewish Christians are struggling to accept Gentile Christians. And so he's really trying to help them understand how Gentiles can become part of the kingdom without works of the law. So what Paul's really saying is that you can become a Christian without having to do all the marks of Judaism. So you are saved through grace by faith, not by works, so that no one can boast, right? James, on the other hand, seems to be dealing with a situation where Christians are claiming to have faith but are living opposite of that faith. They're claiming to have faith, but maybe they're living in rebellion, and James is saying this really doesn't work out. And so, if you say you have faith, show me your deeds, because then I'm going to know that your faith is legitimate. So Paul, on one hand, is dealing with people who have a cultural and religious objection to the way that the Gentiles are coming into the kingdom through Christ alone, and he is educating those Jewish Christians that yes, it is only through Jesus, through grace, by faith, that people have come into the kingdom, not by anything that you do as far as like working your way towards salvation. James, on the other hand, seems to be dealing with people who are saying, well, I can be a Christian and do whatever I want. And that's, I think, that's my opinion. That's the consistent path in my mind that I can generate, inductively come up with, that might explain why Paul and James end up saying things that seem completely opposite of each other. So in James chapter 3, I'm always reminded in this chapter of Taming the Tongue and talking about the words that we use. I'm always reminded of Spider-Man, where Uncle Ben tells Peter Parker that with great power comes great responsibility. This is true of teachers. This is true of the words that we say, especially when we're in positions of authority. He begins this chapter by saying, "Not many of you should presume to be teachers, my brothers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check." Now he's going to spend a few verses on talking about our tongue and the words that we use and where those words come from and what it says about our hearts, about our souls. Teachers bear great responsibility. There's 200 plus videos on this channel. I've done teaching. Mark has done teaching. Several other people have done teaching. There'll be more people in the future who will teach on this channel. Teachers bear great responsibility. And there's many times people object in the comments. It's totally fine. I'm learning too. Times I have to defend my position or clarify my position. Teaching is very important communication. And we really have to take it very seriously if we're going to put ourselves in a position of teacher, that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we are in the Word, studying the Word, prayerfully consuming the Word, and then kind of coming out with this teaching that is beneficial to the body, that is edifying to the body, that is encouraging, challenging, and it conveys the message of the text the most accurate way possible. If you presume to be a teacher, it comes with great responsibility. That does not mean that all responsibility lies on the shoulders of the teacher. Students actually also bear responsibility. Now, sometimes I've seen where people feel like the teacher is the only one with responsibility, but students also have a great responsibility to be like those Bereans who were going into the scriptures daily to check and see if what was said is actually true or not. Whenever you hear things on this channel or hear things or read things other places, we need to be going back to the Word and say, is that really what God said about that? Don't take my word for it. Take what is taught on this channel as a launching point out. Now, that does not alleviate me of any responsibility. There's a great responsibility. But James is now going to talk about the power of words, first and foremost for those of us who teach, but then secondly, just in life in general. And here's what he says. He says, again, we all stumble in many ways, verse 2. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. We put bits in the mouths of horses to make them obey us. We can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large, they are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. This is like WWF back in the day when they would say, like, your mouth is writing checks that your body can't cash. I just thought that was like the funniest expression when I was a kid. And he's saying our tongue just speaks these great boasts. It says these big things sometimes bigger than we're able to back up our own selves. And so, a great forest is set ablaze by just one small spark. I'm reminded of when we lived in California. Some of the biggest wildfires in California history have been going on in the last few weeks. I think 5 of the top 6. And I would remember driving down I-5 coming into Los Angeles, and seeing a whole hillside on fire and firefighters trying to put out the hillside before it spread into something much greater. And I would ask people about that because I was not used to the dryness. I was used to the South where there's humidity. And they would say, yeah, all it takes is someone throwing out a cigarette butt or a chain dragging on the road, clinking along that's making sparks that catch something on fire on the side of the road. There was one of the biggest fires in California history in the last month or so was started by a gender reveal party where the mom and the dad had some kind of firework thing that exploded with blue or pink to show boy or girl. I think it was one of the greatest forest fires in California history. Small spark, big fire, big results. The tongue is a very small thing, but it becomes a large part of who we are. Think about the big personalities that you know, or even the people who maybe are harder to recognize. A lot has to do with how much they say and how loud they say it and how they say it. He says in verse 7, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea have been tamed and have been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. James is not saying that's universally true all the time. He's just saying this is how things tend to go. Our words tend to get a little bit out of whack, out of line, and it can turn into some really evil, deadly things. Now he says another expression that I grew up with was sometimes if someone said a bad word, someone might say, you kiss your mom with those lips? Reminds me of James 3:9. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Let me read that again. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in His likeness. You think about the hypocrisy of something like that, where you're coming to church on Sunday morning and you're worshiping God, and then you're just going right out with those same words, the same tongue. You are spewing out hatred or just bitterness and anger, these sorts of things. He says in verse 10, out of the same mouth come praise and cursing, my brothers, this cannot be. Can both fresh and salt water flow from the same spring? Can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. He's saying whatever is in here is going to come out. Whoever you are, it's what's going to come out. So whatever's coming out is indicative of what's on the inside. And so if what's coming out is not how it needs to be, you need to take a good close look on the inside. If you've ever wrestled with profanity, you know just how hard that habit is to kick. And it's indicative of things that are going on the inside. And so now in James chapter 3, he starts talking about wisdom. And he says this in chapter 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Here's how you know. Just like you could say how you know what's on the inside is what the tongue speaks. How you know the wise is the one who shows it by a good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. There is wisdom in humility. Often the proud, the boastful, the arrogant are the loudest, the most obnoxious, who use the most vain words. But then he says, but on the other side, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom, quote unquote, does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil. Think about that. If you're boastful and arrogant, he says that's from the devil. But if you're trying to live a wise life, anybody want to live a wise life? I think we would all say, yes, I want to live a wise life. Then show it by a life lived in humility that comes from wisdom. Not through envy, not through bitterness, not through selfish ambition, not through boasting. That is not heavenly wisdom. It is unspiritual. It is of the devil. And he says in verse 16, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder in every evil practice. You see. So if we want to be wise people, we need to live humble lives in submission to our Lord. And it comes back again. He got us going back and forth here. And then in verse 17 he says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. We need to be people of peace. We need to be people of submission to God. We need to be people of righteousness, of purity, not double-minded, not deceiving ourselves, not boastful, not prideful, not arrogant. And it all comes back to the way we talk. If you want to know the truth and the root of whether or not you're a wise person, it's going to come back to the way you talk. Do you share things about people you shouldn't share? Do you want to prove your knowledge to other people? In a sense, that's boasting, isn't it? If you share all this knowledge to show how smart you are, you didn't just come out and say, I'm the smartest guy who ever lived. We'd say, that's pride and proud and boasting. No, but we can be prideful and boasting without saying those kinds of things. We need to check our hearts and make sure that the kind of wisdom that we're exhibiting from our life is a heavenly wisdom, not an unspiritual, quote-unquote, wisdom of the world. Which kind of life are we going to live? The life of the heavenly person or the life of the earthly person? The spiritual life or the unspiritual life? What comes most natural to our flesh or what comes most unnatural to our flesh? Because the wise life of humility and submission does not come natural to us. James chapter 3. Hope it's been helpful. See you in James 4.